Dude, so you actually think I can do this?
You mean like run the marathon?
Yeah, I registered the other
And
day.
you're not talking about walking.
No, you know what I mean?
That's the first step, is like to start running.
Right. Yeah, that's the first step.
Second step is to get the sweatband on.
Bro, I got it,
You're
man.
serious. But you know what, though? It is possible.
You've done stuff like this.
1 year, Chris, one year,
Yeah.
went from 323 pounds to running a half marathon in under 2 hours.
Village Church is partnering with the Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Stabilization Unit to raise $70,000 to the BMO Vancouver Marathon.
So I'm here to kind of partner up, to root people on, to show people that, hey, you can do this, you can accomplish your goals, and in the meantime, help other people as well.
So there's 3 ways you can get involved. You can run this thing, and now there's 3 different runs. A marathon sounds huge, but you can either run the full marathon, a half marathon, or the 8K. The second way is to actually give. We want to raise this $70,000 for this unit, so we need people's generosity, including yours. And the last way is to volunteer. Come race day, we need people to be running water tables, helping with the actual function of the marathon, and being there to cheer on our runners.
And here's what I'm thinking. This was actually a pair.
Yeah.
So I'll wear these, you wear that, and it's like one of those things where...
Friendship bracelet.
Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome back. It's good to see you guys here. Hope you've had an awesome week. Mark, this last week we started in Matthew 9, chapter 9, and the question that came out I really want to talk about first was the idea of city, and you talked about like that often we as Christians feel like we need to be more isolated, sometimes outside of the city, country, things of like space and the creation of God, things that we can really enjoy. That's something where we feel most spiritual a lot of times. But then you went into saying the importance of the city, and you quoted Tim Keller saying that like the city has the most image of God per square foot than any other place, right? And like, I mean, there's one line like Jesus loves people, not plants, and things like that.
More than plants.
More than plants. He
loves plants too.
Right? Yeah, that's good clarification.
Right.
But what is it about, I mean, when you talk about like the city and you're talking about what's the importance of that? Why do we want the city? Why should that be a place that we focus on more than other places? Right. I mean, is it about being like, are you saying just about being around people? Is it something where it's about people? Is that the point, that people matter?
I think so. For the vision of the church to be that we, of course, places in the country and whatever are really good, and we go away and we reflect and we think, and maybe some of us live there, and it's not to cast disparagements on that, but it's to say, in our lives, are we living lives that are among the people, among people at all, among the people of the city or the town that you live in or whatever? And so, for instance, there's a guy named Wendell Berry who a lot of people who love the philosophy about the devil made the city but God made the country, they really go to him because he's kind of this farmer, poet, Christian theologian guy, and believes we should make our own food and all that kind of stuff. And he has this poem talking about the agrarian mind and how important it is to have an agrarian mind, and so one of the things about it, though, that I love about Wendell Berry is his point isn't so much that we should live away from everybody and blah blah blah, though that is part of his idea. There's a bigger idea within his philosophy, which is that we should be local. And that I think that we can hold on to that idea and apply it to the city in the sense that the point is that we need to be local. We need to, as you live your life, whether you live in Vancouver or Richmond or Surrey or Langley or Clover, wherever you live, are you local? Do you have a presence locally? Do you and your community groups, do you leave that community group and not have to drive an hour and a half to get to your community group, and then you start to learn the names of the barista at Starbucks, and you start to ask about her life, and you start to learn the name of the guy who owns the vegetable shop around the corner from your house, and you start to live a life that's local and in that way incarnational. The idea that Jesus came into our scenario. He got dirty. He met us where we were at. He spoke our language. He told stories we could understand. Are you doing that at all locally? Question. I think that's the point I want people to take away is so often in kind of a consumer culture, we'll drive to church, we'll go back home, we'll come at the driveway, put the garage door up, go in, put the garage door behind us, and kind of live these isolated lives that we don't know the names of our neighbors, and we don't know the names of the people who own the shops around us. And so my challenge would be kind of pulling from this idea that Jesus went from the boat and he went back into his own city. More so maybe even than the whole city versus the country, for the sake of application for our community group discussion, would more be about, are you local? Are you being local? Do you know the people around you so that ultimately over time in relationship they can come to know Jesus? So that's a big challenge.
Yeah, our circles often are not like where we live, right? We don't find that nowadays. People drive to where they want to be. They find the circles they like and they fit into the best, and so you're willing to commute far distances to get into a community group that fits with you. So it's kind of opening yourself up. What you're saying is to the people around you who you didn't choose. So it's like to the people that you live next to, the people that you're living around, like you said, the barista and things like that. I was talking with community group leaders up in Maple Ridge, and it was super encouraging to talk with them because they just poured out their heart about the city of Maple Ridge. I mean, they were just so intentional. I mean, they come to church in Surrey, they travel down here often, they don't work right in Maple Ridge, but their heart was for their local community. And that's something that I think we could actually work through and apply in our groups. So I want you guys to take some time right now and just talk and pray and discuss about how you can actually impact your locality, where you're living right now, where you're meeting, and let's just talk about that as groups. So Mark, you had talked, we talked about suffering in our lives, suffering in the world. Obviously this paralytic man in the story in chapter 9 had suffered. We don't know how long, if it was 5 years, 1 year, 2, how long he was paralyzed. But it was obviously to the point where his friends, I mean, had seen him like this, were sick of seeing him in suffering, how he wasn't living a life that they thought was full, and took him to Jesus for healing. One thing, and it sounded like you had been talking, when you were talking about suffering, how God doesn't just allow it, but does God actually like give us suffering? Does he... Like, it's not that he just allows it, but would a good God give his people suffering in their lives?
That's a massive question that I think is, it's kind of the heavy waters of debate. I got an email yesterday from someone who's saying, were you saying that people, that God sends suffering on us to humble us? Was that the point? And it's kind of an interesting kind of line to walk, because this person said, it's that God never sends suffering, period, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that biblically speaking, that's actually kind of a hard case to make, because the Bible constantly hints at the idea that because God is sovereign, really what are our options when someone's suffering?
And just pause for a second. Unpack the word sovereign, just so people.
Sovereign. I mean, he's completely meticulously in control and over everything that is happening throughout history. So it's not kind of a what's called a deist version of God, where he's removed and aloof, and he kind of started the world and then backed up and started watching and went, oh man, that's too bad. He's not that. Our theology is that he's intimately involved, as Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount that we just came through. He knows every hair on our heads, and he knows every sparrow that falls to the ground. He's so meticulously involved in everything. And if that is the case, then we only have a couple options when it comes to suffering. The one option is to say he didn't see it coming, and he didn't know it was going to happen. So if you have a disease, a cancer, that God, what are we saying? We're saying God obviously knew it was going to happen. It didn't surprise him. As one writer talks about, God is not an ambulance chaser that sees the thing happen and then tries to figure out what to do. But he's more of a surgeon who's actually in control of these things, and so our options are either he didn't know it was coming. And of course, if he didn't know it was coming, then I think we have a bigger problem than the one we're faced with now if he's sovereign over it. Because now we just got a God who's just like me and you. He doesn't know anything.
So that's actually, something happened, I got to get in there.
Yeah, that's actually what I would see the worst of the options. Or he saw it coming and he could stop it, he could heal it. But with some of our suffering, he didn't choose to stop it midstream. but he could. So really, what are we going to say? That he sent it, that he oversees it, that he allows it, and part of the point here is I'm trying to walk the balance of, I didn't necessarily say in this sermon that he sent it on this guy. I think I'd be reading a bit in to what I said, but that's not to say that I don't think that can happen, or that's not part of God's options. I actually think it is, and the reason is because biblically speaking, we see it, whether you go back to the Old Testament all the way through the New, you see all these hints biblically. God sent suffering in the context of Egypt. He sent Israel out into exile. He sent Adam and Eve out into the garden. He sent his own son, Jesus, to come and suffer and die. And the book of Isaiah says it pleased the Lord to crush him. And so constantly in the Bible, and then of course Paul talks about the idea in Romans 5 that suffering ultimately produces character in this line of words that he says it produces. First Peter chapter 1, chapter 2, that suffering is the fire that refines a piece of gold, and so God is using it in our life to bring about his own, making us into the image of Christ and so on. Yeah. Paul talks about the idea in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He has this thorn in the flesh in his life, and whatever scholars debate what it is, but in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7, it says, "So to keep me from being too elated by the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weakness, insults, hardship, persecutions, and calamity, for when I am weak, then I am strong." Wow. And it's interesting because he says that Satan gave me this thorn, but of course we know that ultimately God is sovereign even over Satan.
Right.
And anything that Satan brings into a life, you go to the book of Job, Satan actually has to go into the council room of God and ask him permission to go at Job and bring suffering into his life. So I think there is, now again, like I said, I wasn't trying to say God, paralyze this guy and it's that intent and I'm going to do awful things in your life. In order to humble you. I think humility comes out of our suffering.
Certainly, yeah.
And of course we have to be careful about how we talk about God's role in it. But I wouldn't take, I also wouldn't take the option that God is surprised by our suffering, that he somehow just comes along after, that he's just kind of opened up the world and see what happens, and then he'll come along later and try to, I think he's more over it, and in control of it, and it goes through his filter. My wife's dad, every time he would put her to sleep, she had a lot of anxiety growing up as a little kid, and he would sing this song that nothing will happen to me today without it going through the Father's hands.
Wow, what a great reminder.
And there's a comfort in that.
Absolutely.
There's a comfort in that. Yeah. But then there's kind of a weirdness in it too, that if something does happen, it went through the Father's hands.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's the bittersweet side of it all.
You're right.
And I think that's the tension we have to live in, and that's a biblical tension.
But there's a confidence that God is a good Father, that he's even what comes through talking, like you're talking about in Isaiah, that it was pleased him that Jesus was crushed. I mean, in that context of what it achieved and how he loved us. So there's purpose in these things. Let's take some time. I think we got a lot to chew on from that in our groups to discuss just that.
Yeah. All right, so one of the things that we saw in this story was the response of the people was that Jesus was blaspheming by saying, you're forgiven. The response is negative to Christianity in a sense. So one of the things that we're all dealing with in life is the response of the people around us to our faith in Jesus, whether at work or our family or whatever. Yeah. So talk about that. How has that been a tension in your life, Chris?
Yeah.
You decide to follow Jesus. how hard is it in the midst of people criticizing you or criticizing us, whatever? I mean, we got all kinds of different people in our community groups, and they're experiencing things in their own life.
Yeah.
What does that talk to? What that's like, and how do we get through it? How do we push through it?
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of layers to that, and it's a good question. And I think everybody who is a Christian will feel that at some level, whether they've been raised in a Christian family, like I was raised in a Christian family, and when I felt called into ministry, when I started pursuing that, I had trouble really talking about that with my dad even, and being like, hey, like, I feel called, and he didn't understand what that was like. He's like, I've never been called in my life. I don't know what it's like. Why do you have to move? Why can't you go somewhere close to home?
Right.
And there's all these different elements. Was it from God? Was that something I had to take in and consider? Sure. But there's always different people's responses, and like we see, I mean, in the Bible, people's response to Jesus, I mean, saying, oh man, that's blasphemy, we're going to put you to death. We've heard things like that too, even stories around the church, and even not so much me being told I'm going to be killed, but things in my life where I feel, you know, the different tensions and pressures from other people who are not okay with us loving and following Jesus. They're not okay with us serving. And a lot of this, I think, if we're honest, comes from this post-Christian culture that we live in Canada. Everybody seems to have just an understanding or a history or some baggage with Christianity. Everybody has an opinion on it. It's not like some other religion that maybe they don't know so well, but everybody in Canada, whether it's through even residential schooling, through the Catholic Church, through the evangelical church, through things going on in their lives, through a culture that was predominantly Christian at one point, has an opinion and a history with it. And what often happens is they're going to bring that with them, and they're going to impose that on you. Now, what I've found in that is you'll get a lot of different responses. Some people love that. Man, it's so great that you're doing this. They almost look at you like you actually get it. They're so encouraged that you're a Christian, you have this brotherhood thing. And some people come at it like, you know, you're brainwashed, you're ruining your life, you're ruining your kid's life, you're just brainwashing other people.
Have you experienced that?
Yeah, directly. Yeah, totally. There's family members and extended family members who are absolutely against what we're doing, and there's been a lot of hard conversations around it. It comes out in different ways, can be very attacking, but in those moments, there's a couple things you got to remember. I mean, one is that they're lost, right? So we can't expect, like Paul talks about, right? This is foolishness to people who don't believe, all of it. And if we know that, if we actually recognize and keep that inside ourselves, we can look at it and say, okay, you know, I'm not the first one to be persecuted. This shouldn't be a surprise that people are up against this in the wrong way. The gospel is offensive to people, and we have to recognize that. So yeah, even in experiences, I found a couple things that help is setting up some good boundaries sometimes with those people. Sometimes you have to create space for you to be okay in those relationships, because close relationships especially have a way of just really crushing in on us. So I think, yeah, there's definitely times where people with family, they're going to come at you, friends are going to come at you, people generally, like a lot of times social networking where people are just, you know, keyboard warriors behind on they can say whatever they want, right? And there's no remorse or guilt, and it's not face to face, so sometimes they're a little bit more cruel, texting, things like that. But I would encourage you guys to absolutely know, like persecution, people coming up against it, a lot of times it's not even personal, but you can take it personally, not in the way of being offended, but in knowing that person's soul in that state is lost, and there's a genuine way to love them and to care for them and to share the gospel with them through your actions.
The thing at stake when you become a Christian isn't so much your reputation. That kind of died with Christ. Paul talks about in Galatians 2. The more important issue when people are doing that is their own state of the soul. And so to try to elevate their own eternal state above your own temporal, I feel bad about myself for the next 2 days. So sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, it's just, that's a great position to have. You have to have that perspective, and if you keep that perspective, then it's going to help you, work through some of it in a way that you're not so hurt. That you're not so.
So why don't you had mentioned the idea of the foolish idea. Why don't you guys in your groups talk about 1 Corinthians chapter 1, work through a few of those verses, and just talk about the foolishness of the gospel and how the world kind of reacts to it, and the tensions you guys have seen in that.